try to collect it in those 2 hours, because that's the water that you get. But you don't have to go that far away. I've been working with the people in Detroit, Michigan, who've had their water cut off, many thousands of them. We actually got a moratorium. We got the UN involved and brought UN experts to actually look at what's happening. But this is an area where a lot of money left the inner city. Most of the people left behind are poor, mostly African American, older people or single mothers, very high unemployment. They don't have the funds, and so the city, near bankruptcy then, now in bankruptcy, doubled the price of water. People cannot afford it, so they're coming in and they just literally go house to house and turn the water off. And try raising kids, try looking after somebody ill with no water. So it's not just happening far away, it's happening in the so-called rich parts of our world, in North America as well. Now, these are real issues, and there's, again, just the last of these stats that another NASA report that just came out last month reported that there is an unprecedented mega drought coming in the Midwest in the United States and parts of Canada, the Great Plains and the Southwest over the next few decades. And they say that it will last decades, that it will be unlike anything in living history or living memory. Now, here's a prediction I have for you. You've got a presidential election coming up. I predict that this issue will not be on the table. I predict that they will not speak about it, and they will not write about it, and they will not be asked about it in debates. Now, why is this? Well, I just have 4 thoughts on why this might be. The first is what I call the myth of abundance. We all learned back in grade 6 or whatever that there's this finite amount of water. It can never be destroyed. It's the same, not only the same amount of water, but the exact same water that was here at the beginning of the planet, and it goes around and around, and we all had this kind of diagram in our heads. So it's almost like a big river around the earth, and you could just stick all the straws you want in it. And so we learned that we couldn't run out. And I also think that in the global north or the west or whatever you want to call us, we tend to think that there'll always be a technology that will fix it. But that myth is deep and rooted, and it's really hard to get rid of. Secondly, we tend to see water as a resource for our pleasure and profit and convenience. We don't see water as the element that is necessary for life. We don't respect water. We don't think about it. We don't care about it. It exists to serve us, period, full stop. One of the advisors to President Hoover when they were building the Hoover Dam and those other big mega dams said, America will be great when she learns to conquer her rivers. So this whole notion that water is here to be conquered for our economic model is really a really powerful one. I also think that we have misdiagnosed the water crisis. If you talk to any environmentalist or most people involved in climate change, they will say that water is a victim of climate change that's been induced by greenhouse gas emissions. And that's true. The melting glaciers and the melting ice packs and all of that is true. But what they don't say, and what's missing from the diagnosis, is that when we take water from water retentive landscapes, when we move it to where we want it, that's the entire story in California. They have enough water. It's that they're moving it all over the place so that they can produce 85% of all the almonds for the entire world, right, in a state running out of water. So as they say, water runs uphill to money, right? So we have a situation where we're misdiagnosing what the situation is, and our mistreatment, our displacement, our abuse of water is one of the major causes of climate change. And it's really very, very much past time that we started putting this in the mix, and that we started talking about water and the way we treat water and how we could undo what we've done as one of the answers to climate change. And finally, I would have to say to you, in terms of reasons for our politicians not talking about this, ours don't either. I'm not suggesting it's only here in the United States. I think it's very common, except in a few countries where they're just facing water shortage, like the water is running out now. But it's the dominant model of economic development, which says more growth unlimited growth. I mean, we could just keep going forever. More trade, more stuff, more market economy. I want my strawberries in January, and I don't care where they come from or who it costs. And so we have this notion that we can have all things at all times. And we have created a global economy, which is basically, I would argue, not only creating enormous wealth gaps between rich and poor. Do you know that in the year 2000 there were 111 billionaires in the world? There are now over 2,500 billionaires in the world. 15 years, what does that tell you about policies of the 1%, for the 1%, and by the 1%, right? So I would argue that the way we grow food for a global market is a way of like putting a huge pipe into our water systems and sucking that water up and taking it away. And remember, when you grow food, when you use water to grow food, you're consuming that water. That water does not get returned to the watershed. So what do we need? Well, I call for a new water ethic. And a new water ethic would say that water is not just a resource, as I say, for our pleasure and profit and convenience, but it is the essential element that gives us life. And it is to be respected and revered, and we need to come up with a new relationship with water. We also, and if I were queen of the world and could make every leader in the world do as I say and save the world's water, all policy, and this has to happen at all levels, municipal, state, federal, international, all policy has to ask the question, what's the impact on water? Our energy, using fossil fuels, is not only bad for air, everybody knows that, it's terrible for water. Fracking uses, destroys, abuses huge amounts of water. Growing corn for ethanol, it takes 1,700 gallons of water to make 1 gallon of corn ethanol. So yes, okay, maybe that's a better use for your car, but the water footprint it's leaving is not worth it. I would argue that ethanol is worse than fossil fuels because of the way it's treating water. And we mustn't set up this air versus water kind of reality. What would it look like if we asked the question about the impact on water of food production? Well, I'll tell you what it would look like. We'd have to stop using chemicals. We wouldn't have any more Toledo green water if we stopped having those factory farms, if we stopped putting all those pesticides and narcotics of every kind into animal feed and so on. If we went back to the way we know how to grow food, more local, more sustainable, family farms, organic, and food for local consumption, we could cut the water consumption of the world in half. So what would be the question then is always, what is the impact on water of these trade policies? What if we took into account, okay, all trade maybe isn't the same. Say I've got a white shirt coming from this country and a white shirt, coming from this country, and they both took the exact same amount of water to produce, but the water in this country is almost gone, and so that shirt is coming at the price of the local people's water rights. In this country, they still have water, so it's not quite the same. So we don't ask that question. We never ask the question in these trade agreements, are we protecting our natural resources? Are we protecting our people? We also have to declare water to be a public trust. And public trust is a very old concept in the United States, very deeply entrenched, particularly in the northeastern states, less so in the southwestern states where they have more of a first to come here, got the rights to water sort of thing. But public trust basically says that water is a commons. It belongs to all of us, and governments must protect it in the name of the people for all and for future generations. Now, that doesn't mean that you can do whatever you want. It's not a commons that you can, say, well, I can abuse it because it doesn't belong to anybody. We're fiercely going to have to protect this commons, and we're going to have to say, what is the what is what are our priorities for having people having access to this water, because you just can't have it for anything anybody wants it for. I'll give you an example of Vermont. I worked on this legislation. The state of Vermont has beautiful water, lots of groundwater, but a few years ago they had a whole bunch of bottled water companies coming in and setting up a plant and just drinking the local water source until it was gone. And they were really concerned, so they brought in legislation that their groundwater is a public trust. And they actually said, to protect it, we're going to give priority to water for people's daily needs, water for protection of the ecosystem, and water for local food production, not for big agribusiness to make money sending our water and our food far away. So they had that hierarchy of access, and they were just able to use their public trust doctrine because there was a nuclear facility that was leaking tritium into the local water source, and the local company, the nuclear power company, said, yes, so it's our water, we have water rights. And the state was able to say, no, the fact that we've made it a public trust trumps your private right to dump tritium into this water, and so we're taking it back. So it's a very exciting concept that, excuse me, we need to go back to. And I've been working a lot with a group of people around the Great Lakes, as we want to get the Great Lakes to be declared a commons, a public trust, and a protected bioregion, so that we stop seeing it as, well, your piece of it and this piece, but we see it as a whole watershed. We need common laws, we need common protections, we need common enforcement. You get enforcement totally different on different parts of the lakes. We need together to say no more shipping of this extreme energy. We cannot put this water up at this kind of risk. And it's a kind of new way of thinking, thinking in terms of watershed governance, which they're doing in Europe. Since 2000, all of their watersheds must be governed by committees and legislators from all of the countries that surround these water sources. So it's not, my water, I'm only going to try to get this amount. It's going to be our water collectively. At a global level, I'm calling for what I'm now naming a Marshall Plan for water. And you'll know, some of you, that the Marshall Plan was the major plan led by the United States to rebuild Europe after the Second World War. And I mean, Europe was in tatters. And everything from rescuing orphan children to rebuilding schools and hospitals to putting an economy back together. It was an absolutely incredible endeavor. And we need a Marshall Plan for water. We need our leaders to come together and say, this is a crisis. When you read that California has 1 year left of water, I don't know what people in California think when they read that, but I think a lot of them are going to be moving here. I guess. We might see, American refugees moving from one part of the country to the other. What do we think of when we read that? We have to take this very, very seriously. And the United Nations needs to set up a separate process for water. Right now, water is linked into and comes under the umbrella of climate change. And so if you go to those climate summits, and I go to every one of them, all they talk about are greenhouse gas emissions, which are very important. I'm not for a moment negating that. But they don't talk about water as anything but a victim. So they don't hear the stories about how if you rebuild water retentive landscapes, if you've created a desert, if you bring in the technologies and the techniques that we know, and if you put people to work rebuilding and refurbishing these watersheds, the rain comes back. It's absolutely miraculous. I mean, there are so many wonderful examples of where we've done this. The key components of this are absolutely at the heart of it would be watershed protection, conservation, and restoration. We have to stop destroying our water systems. We have to repair those that have been hurt. National and international projects to replenish water retentive landscapes. I'm working with a wonderful scientist named Michael Kravsik in Slovakia. He's had a lot of land that had been destroyed by bad farming practices, by old bad industrial dumping and so on. And he convinced many municipalities and their own federal government to allow a project where they put thousands of people to work rebuilding the kinds of small berms and dams, water retention, water collection, rainwater collection, and so on. And they have greened an amazing amount of the land. Same in India. There are many projects where a wonderful man they call the Rainmaker has brought back water to just a massive amount of land. A wonderful engineer in southern Australia that convinced his government to let him gather all the rainwater, the storm water, the sewage water, put it all through massive lagoons that were planted with the kind of plants that eat bacteria and the poison, and they've got so much water. They've greened the desert. The birds have come back. The animals have come back. It's a miracle, because we need to remember that nature will come back. If we stop hurting nature, nature loves us, wants to come back to us as soon as it can. We need food policies that promote local, organic, sustainable agriculture. We have to move away from the form of agriculture that we're now engaged in and has been supported by policy in all of our countries. And we've exported it. There's an area of land 3 times the size of Great Britain in Africa alone, where foreign interests, foreign investors, foreign corporations, foreign governments have come in and bought up massive amounts of land and water, and they're using it to grow crops that they sell out of the community. And they're using all the same bore well technology that's ruining the Ogallala aquifer here. They're using there and pumping this water up, destroying water there. We have to learn. People who have lived for millennia in communities in Asia and Africa and South America know how to live with the fluctuations of rain and then dry season, and they know how to conserve, and they know how to farm dry land. We come in with our technology and we're ruining it. Energy sources that don't harm water have got to go, and we're fighting the pipelines. The Keystone XL pipeline, which is still a very hot issue and is going to remain contentious through the next election. But we're fighting huge other pipelines in Canada because they want to move that bitumen, that terrible tar sands stuff from the tar sands in Alberta to export markets. Fracking is a really dangerous form of energy in terms of water, and so we have to say we can do better. And if we ask the question for energy, what's the impact on water, we're going to come up with different solutions. I also call for, in my book, the notion of using water as a source of peace rather than a source of conflict. And think about it for a minute. If you stop and think, in a world where the demand for water is going straight up and the supply is going straight down, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that maybe there's going to be conflict. Maybe there already has been. The deep germ of many of the conflicts in the world have at least partially to do with water, from Syria to Egypt to Israel, Palestine. Many disputes in Africa, disputes in Asia are around water, or water is a part of it. And water is being used now around the world as a weapon of war. The government in Syria has cut the water sources off to the people in Aleppo, which is where the original revolution took place, just cut the water. And so if you want to make war on people, you just take away their water supply, and there's very little people can do in the absence of access to water. So the question would be then, well, if it can be a source of conflict, could water equally be a source of peace? Could we think about water as nature's gift to humanity to teach us how to live with each other? And maybe, my grandfather was taught to hate your grandfather, and your father was taught to hate my father, and vice versa, and I'm supposed to hate you, except we both live on this river and it's dying. So maybe instead of expending our energy hating each other, maybe we can come together and build something that saves this river. Maybe our kids will live in peace because we'll come together and save this water source. And so there's a whole discipline in universities now around water and nature as being forms of peacemaking, forms of negotiating peaceful settlements, coming around the concept of governance, watershed governance, and watershed sharing. Instead of saying, this is my portion and I'll fight you for it, it's like, what's the health of the watershed demand? Whatever that is, let's conform to it. Let's make that happen. One of my favorite examples is a group called Friends of the Earth Middle East, who came together years ago, and they've got people from all, members from all the warring factions, Gaza, Israel, Syria, Lebanon, all of them, and they came together to say, we're not going to talk history because we won't agree, and we're not going to talk religion or politics because we won't agree. We are going to talk about how to save the water systems in our community. And it's been so successful that there's actually some parts of the wall that have been taken down where people just got to know each other and realized how much more in common they had with one another than they might have thought. We also have to promote human laws that mirror and reflect the laws of nature. And there's a whole movement that I'm involved in, a number of really thoughtful, interesting people are creating called the rights of nature. And that is the notion that nature has rights beyond its use to us. Yes, there's the public trust, which means we all have common access, we all have equal rights to these common assets, but water has rights separately, even if water didn't serve us. Water serves other species, water serves itself. Nature has its own rights, and we've got to stop thinking of ourselves at the top of this chain of command as if we're so important. And how that would be, well, we actually have examples here in North America and around the world where local ordinances are being declared that the local water or the local wetland or the local forest has kind of the status of a human being, right? It has fundamental rights, and people are coming around the concept of protecting those rights. And somebody said to me, oh, you mean you can't go fishing, you know, because fish have rights? And I said, no, of course you can go fishing, but you can't fish a species to extinction. That would be the way the law would work. Yes, you can take water from that watershed, but you can't take so much water from that watershed that you destroy the watershed. You have to leave the integrity of the species or the integrity of the ecosystem intact. And that's a sea change for us, for we humans. And the more rich we get, and the more powerful we get, and the more industrialized, and the more urbanized, and the more consumeristic we get, the more we think that nature is there to serve us. And nature's got a really, really rude wake-up call for us. Finally, and then I'm going to stop so we can chat with each other. Finally, we have to make real this concept of water as a human right. Nancy talked about the struggle at the United Nations. I was invited in 2008, 2009 to be an advisor to the president of the UN General Assembly. That's not Ban Ki-moon, the